came up with the idea of the Investment Council and saw to its passage and its successful completion. The four-year medical school. Imagine what this city would be like if it didn't have the engine of medical progress that we have today. That's a creation of the Democrats in the 1970s. So when we think about the future and what we're going to do in 2010, we really truly do stand on the shoulders of giants. Some of those folks are here tonight. Some of them could not be here tonight. But understand that the next golden age of South Dakota, which will be led by the Democratic Party in Pierre, South Dakota, will look to that time as a model, as a framework for what we can do. So then the question becomes, what is it that the majority party has done with this legacy of leadership that was left after the 1970s? Well, the record is not so good. It was interesting for me to hear our Congresswoman talk about the Republicans' lack of leadership at the national level, whether it's the lack of fiscal discipline or whatever it may be, because it really sounds very similar to what we've experienced in Pierre, South Dakota. The litany is a long one, and I won't take too much of your time, but just think of it. We have added a state employee every 48 hours in a state whose population has remained relatively static. We have increased spending by 53% over that 8-year period. At the same time, we lecture to schools and county commissions that they cannot raise their tax base by more than 3% or the rate of inflation, whichever is less. We have a deficit that I will inherit as the next governor of South Dakota of $107 million, as measured against a general fund of $1.14 billion. Amanda Mack gave me a copy of Time magazine that came out just June 24th, and I urge all of you to read it. It has a fascinating story, the cover story about states and how they're dealing with this fiscal time. South Dakota has a $107 million deficit against the general fund. It's a 9% rating. That is, our deficit is 9% of the expected revenue to come. California, 9.1%. If you think California is well run, you'll love South Dakota. We really have got to change the way we govern in Pierre, South Dakota, and it's got to start. We in Pierre, South Dakota have something called pay to play that we tried as a state to outlaw and we failed. Pay to play is probably the most insidious form of political corruption I can imagine, but it's legal in South Dakota. Let me just tell you how it works. I couldn't help but hear Stephanie Herseth-Sandlin's colleague, Joe Barton from Texas, at the hearing about BP, claiming that because the President of the United States insisted BP be responsible to the tune of $20 billion, that it was a shakedown. Well, let me tell you what a shakedown is. It's when the Lieutenant Governor of South Dakota raises $250,000 to $500,000 from state employees or state appointees who depend on that individual not only for their job, but for the rate of pay and the position that they hold. That's a shakedown. Shakedown has got to end, and we can end that. We can end that with the proper treatment in terms of legislation and leadership in Pierre, South Dakota. I know we can do it. We've got so many areas that we can improve on things in South Dakota, and so many of these things are the inevitable result of one party in power, remaining in power, unchecked. But that's all changing, and we all know it's time that that changes. That's our slogan, and there's a reason for that, because it is time that we change South Dakota. It is time that the attitudes and values of the people of South Dakota are what should dominate in Pierre, and not a political culture that has stopped to care very much about the people it was sent there to serve. That's what we need to change, and it's time to do exactly that. You know, I do like history, and I know that I did probably bore Ben a little bit with stories of the rocks between Isabel and Rapid City, but I really do like history. And one of the favorite periods for me to study was the Knipe era. of the 1970s. When Dick Knipe was sworn into office in 1971, he gave what I consider one of the most inspirational inaugural addresses. And you've heard me quote it before, it's just one of my favorites. And I'd like to share it with you now, because when you think about what sort of framework we're looking for the state of South Dakota, I like to think that this at least sets several touchstones for us to follow. Governor Knipe said to us in 1971, "We will decide now if we will allow the hand of pollution to grasp more of our land, our air, and our water. We will decide now if our governmental institutions, legitimate in a bygone era, are still adequate for today's tasks. We will decide now if all of our people deserve the best possible educational opportunities and health care. We will decide now if our economic structure will hold our opportunities for young people and provide for true diversity." Imagine that. A governor in South Dakota 40 years ago talking about health care and diversity. How refreshing it would be if we had that today. But Bernie and I sit in Pierre, South Dakota, wondering what the agenda of this administration is. Year after year, they come before us and they give a State of the State message which really has nothing in it. We're used to at least an idea or two, but we don't get them from the State of the State message of this administration. We keep hoping, we hope in vain. It is an administration, a government, that seems to be paralyzed by indecision. And yet, we continue to run deficits at a higher and higher rate. You know, I often said, I could even probably defend a deficit or two if you just have a purpose behind them. Just tell me you're investing in the children of this state. Tell me you're investing in clean energy. Tell me something other than I'm continuing to build the bureaucracy and continuing to do the things that have been done in the past simply because they've been done in the past. That's unacceptable for the people of South Dakota. It's unacceptable for the blueprint that was established many years ago by Governor Knipe, and it will be unacceptable for me. In the face of what has gone on in Pierre, South Dakota, I just want you to know that the Democratic legislators have been true leaders. We have fought again and again, whether it is to restrain the growth of government, and we've done a remarkable job at that, and I believe that has framed the debate of this gubernatorial election. That's what everyone's talking about. Whether there is a crisis, a budget crisis, my opponent is the only one who thinks that there isn't one. Even all four of the other Republicans conceded that we were in a crisis situation, and we've known that for some time. But whether it's the failure to invest in education, whether it's ignoring children, whether it's ignoring energy challenges in the future. Though many times it seems that my opponents do believe that life begins at conception, but it must end at birth. Because they're against the Birth to Three program. They're against the kids. They're against the children. You have to wonder that if you're going to be against all of those programs, why are you bothering to run for office? If you don't care about the future of the children of South Dakota, for goodness sake, step aside and let a team take over that really, truly cares about the children of South Dakota, cares about the energy needs of South Dakota, and cares about education. It is true that we have our work cut out for us. We have no illusions about the challenges we face. But I'm going to tell you something. I feel so good about this race. I felt it before I came to this convention, but you have given me a new energy. To be in that room with all of you earlier today when you chose your candidates was absolutely exciting. To hear Congresswoman Herseth Sandlin ignite the floor of this convention was just enthralling. To hear Senator Johnson and Senator Klobuchar, and to know that she's coming back to help Stephanie, to help all of us bring about a new era in South Dakota politics is just incredibly exciting. But I want you to know that there is the possibility of a danger. And I want to tell you a story that Susie Blake actually told us in a group, and I asked her if I could share it with you tonight.